Welcome to The Lock Shop with Nielsen and Hustler, powered by Coolbet Canada.
What is going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Fantasy Football Extravaganza, a Lock Shop production, brought to you by our wonderful partners at Coolbet. If you can't tell, we're dressed, man, I'll say this, they nailed the colors, man. These colors just pop. I've had this hoodie for like 2 years, and look at this thing. It's still beautiful.
It is absolutely my favorite in the rotation. And shout out to Jake, who just sent a nice box of some more Coolbet gear here to the peg. So, be rocking a few new looks on the program coming up soon, and we're gonna have some great prizing over at Winnipeg Sports Talk. By the way, folks, join us daily, YouTube, 1 p.m. Central, for all the latest goings on in and around the middle of the country. Dusty, what's up?
Not much, man. Congrats on hitting the Bears last night. I should have been with you on that one. I was like the end of the first quarter. I was like, what was I thinking? Why did I sign with the Pats as an 8-point favorite? I like instant regret. It just looked like I know this is the fantasy football thing, and we'll get to a bunch of fantasy football. But last night, it looked like Bill Belichick didn't have an answer. It didn't look like he knew what he was doing with his own quarterback situation. It didn't look like he really knew how to handle Justin Fields. Not that Fields lit the world on fire, but he had his best fantasy football night of the year, and he's been trending in the right direction on that. I don't want to sit here today and say he got full-blown, got out-coached, but that's sure what it looked like last night, Huss, which was crazy.
Well, I mean, listen, I was at the hockey game last night. Shout out to the Jets and the Canes for that nice little parlay last night. And I was obviously just following along, mainly hoping to see field goals show up in the box score. Shout out to you and me. We were both on that, gave it out, and that was a great way to start off the daily picks with a plus money winner for the week.
That was nice.
I was just like, oh, there's Eddie Pinheiro again. Beautiful. But man, it sure looked like, and obviously watching back the highlights, a game that, started off poorly for the Patriots. They got a big boost from putting Zappy back in, but that was about it. And, I said this when we were breaking the game down yesterday, man. I think Chicago deserved a much better fate last week against the Commanders. They had the ball like literally in the shadow of the goal line 3 times and had nothing to show for it. Yesterday they made a few of them count. And yeah, like the usage of the quarterbacks by Bill Belichick is going to be a big topic, I'm sure, this week in and around New England, because, what does that do for Mac Jones's confidence to get yanked that? And then with Zappy having a nice little push, but then really struggling later on in the game, like where does that leave New England? That's a very, very costly loss for the Pats, who had actually put themselves in a pretty good spot, despite the fact that they're in a division with the Bills, and the New York Jets are 5-2.
Yeah, that's a good point. And the Dolphins are going to only be better with Tua there as well, right? So Pats are in a little bit of a tough spot with after that loss last night. So from a fantasy perspective, we got to start with the injuries this week, buddy, because this is wild. I mean, for the most part, last couple of weeks, we haven't really had a lot to discuss from an injury perspective, but let me just take you. And a bunch of these guys are questionable, and the trade deadline's coming up in about a week, so that's going to change some things. But let me just run you through this. Tannehill, ankle, questionable week 8. Jets running back Breece Hall, ACL, out for season. They've traded for James Robinson. Zeke Elliott, bruised knee, questionable for week 8. Mike Boone, ankle, out. DK Metcalf, knee, unlikely out for week 8. Mike Williams, ankle, expected to miss several weeks. Debo with a hammy is day-to-day. Alan Lazard with a shoulder, questionable for week 8 as well. What else we got here? Russell Gage, hamstring, questionable for week 8. Daniel Bellinger, eye injury. He had surgery. He's going to be, that's the tight end for the Giants. I mean, there's a lot of injury impact here, Huss, with Mike Williams out. DK Metcalf looks like he's going to be on. I know he's getting carted off. He said, I'm okay, but let's be honest, he's got to miss, I think, a couple of weeks at least. So, and then, of course, the Breece Hall thing's huge. Trickle-down effect in fantasy's big. They trade for James Robinson. Travis Etienne, all of a sudden, is probably a top 12 back the rest of the year. It's weeks like this, and I speak from personal experience here, Huss. It's weeks like this that you have to navigate properly during your fantasy football seasons.
No, there's no doubt about it. And, we had some big teams on buys last week, Chiefs and Chargers this week, but some pretty important players that were starters in leagues that are going to be out for significant periods of time. Just quickly, I was going to talk about Michael Carter a little bit, but, with the trade of James Robinson to the Jets, that's something that has major fantasy impact on both teams.
Yeah.
First of all, Robinson will be able to come in, and he can be a workhorse. He's been that in the past. And it was all Etienne last week. So now Etienne, his stock goes up considerably because he is now the guy, and he was sort of used as the guy last week. But before, they'd had, very much a splitting of carries, and Robinson had still had some big games. And from the Jets' perspective, if you were thinking that Michael Carter was going to be the guy just because he's the last man standing, well, they're giving up some draft pick compensation to get James Robinson. So I imagine that very quickly he will be the guy right now. And considering the lack of a consistent passing attack for the New York Jets, I think James Robinson's value goes up significantly as well heading over to Gotham.
Yeah, it's interesting how this plays out. The Breece Hall thing's very interesting. I told you I made that big Travis Kelce trade we talked about in the lock shop earlier. Well, the guy who had Travis Kelce had Breece Hall, and he was I had Travis Kelce. I was trying to get Breece Hall in that deal. We ended up negotiating a bunch of more picks, and I settled for Brian Robinson. But there was a bigger deal on the table where I also included Aaron Jones. And now I've circled back around to that guy and been like, hey, if you're done with Breece Hall for the year, I still got Aaron Jones available. It's a keeper league. I was like, you're going to have to give a little bit more now. But I do think in dynasty leagues, there may be people who are desperate. Breece Hall probably had them in a really good spot as far as standings go this year. And they're probably going to be willing to sell low on Breece Hall right now just to get warm bodies that can keep them up near the top of the league. So, I'm in 14 leagues, so I'll navigate my way through this. But if you're in 2 or 3 leagues, you can check it out with the Breece Hall owner and see if you can take advantage of him, Huss, right? In a dynasty or a keeper league, that's a guy, even it's just an ACL, right? I know it's an ACL, but it's not like his whole knee's done and it's his MCL and all this stuff. So I'd expect him to come back pretty strong next year. He'll probably be a first-round pick next year. If you can get him something that's equivalent of 3rd or 4th or 5th round value right now, I think you got to do something like that. So you got to take advantage of these situations, buddy.
Yeah, no doubt. And just quickly on the Etienne James Robinson split from Jacksonville.
Yeah.
Saw the funniest, that meme? It's like a couple gang guys in LA, one's with the Crips and one with the Bloods. They've got the red flag and the blue flag, and they're holding them up together kind of in a truce. That's what's happened with the Jacksonville backfield right now. Robinson owners are happy. Etienne owners are happy. And everyone moves forward going to.
Well, I saw one of my favorite fantasy guys yesterday say, I didn't think I'd end up being this happy with my Travis Etienne, James Robinson handcuff stack. And now all of a sudden, you've got 2 RB1s moving forward. So very lucky situation.
I am that guy in one of my leagues. I had Etienne.
Do you? Really?
And the funny thing is, and let's just quickly, and I know we'll get through our plays for this week, but I always enjoy like around week 7 or week 8 going back to the draft and just seeing where guys were being picked. James Robinson was a guy that people were loath to select and went considerably lower than we probably. And part of it was people were so high on Etienne. But you know who the other guy was that went really late considering his likely usage that is just killing it right now?
Josh Jacobs.
Josh Jacobs.
I know.
Jacobs is tearing it up right now. And he was a guy that I think a lot of people sort of held their nose and picked later on if they went with sort of a 0 RB strategy early on in their draft. It's crazy what's happening with him right now. A huge resurgence of a guy that a lot of people were sort of done with going into the season.
How many of you reluctantly took Josh Jacobs in the late 5th or 6th round and went, shit, I don't want this guy, but I got to get a running back. Now you're probably in first in your fantasy league. So, yeah, fantasy's it's a mysterious game that we all like to play. That's for sure. All right, waiver wire targets. Huss, who do you like this week? What's going on?
Well, you know what? Listen, obviously this Jets situation is significant, but I think Michael Carter, who, I had thought that, would just be a guy that would be getting played. He had 13 carries for only 29 yards last week. Now they were going up against Denver, who's got a really good defense, But if you were thinking about jumping on Carter, it's probably diminished quite a bit based on the Robinson acquisition. Couple of receivers that I like, and Marquise Goodwin really popped last week for the Seahawks. And depending on DK Metcalf's situation, he could be a guy that, sees a little bit more action from Geno Smith. Tyler Lockett's still going to get the bulk of the targets. And we saw Will Dissly and Noah Fant, both get into it. Dissly more than Fant last week. But I do think, and, Goodwin might be a sneaky play for a depth receiver if you do have guys on buys, if you're looking for a spot. But the one guy that if he's still available in your league, I would certainly jump on is Peoples-Jones, Donovan Peoples-Jones in Cleveland. We haven't talked a lot about Cleveland's receiving just because Jacoby Brissett's there, Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt get so much of the work. But if you look back, Peoples-Jones has quietly been very, very consistent and is still available, I think, in more than half of leagues. The last 4 games, he's had double digits in 3 of 4, 12, 9, 11, and 11. Like, Peoples-Jones' ceiling isn't that high, but his floor is significant. If you're looking for a guy that you want a warm body to go in and play a week or two, that is going to see a few balls and will have the opportunity of putting up some points, he is certainly a guy that I think I would jump on. And, the other guy that we should mention, this is sort of old news right now, is Donta Foreman. In all likelihood, someone in your league snapped him up off the waiver wire when Christian McCaffrey got traded. But if for some reason that did not happen and it's in there, he is certainly a valuable waiver pick. Still can't believe what Carolina did to Tampa, but I know you don't want to talk about that.
No.
We addressed
what do
that
you mean?
yesterday.
What do you mean? I men in blacked myself with the pen from the Carolina Tampa game. I'll just quickly throw out there Chuba Hubbard in that backfield too. I think there's a chance. I mean, they both had, and this is the interesting thing because Chuba Hubbard had 22 snaps to the 14 for Donta Foreman. Had the touchdown as well, appears to be the passing downs back. And then he got hurt his ankle early in the fourth quarter, and that led to a heavier workload for Foreman the rest of the way. So I think both of these guys should be rostered. Not sure you're starting both of them. Matthew Owanek, Owanek, he's in my Rusty Truck 16 team league up here, and he is starting both of them because his running back situation's so bleak. He just started both of them last week. So I think both of those guys should definitely be rostered. So make sure you look for them. Here's another one from this fallout. Jermichael Hasty is now technically the other back with Travis Etienne. He had like a 60-yard touchdown a couple of weeks ago anyway. If something were to happen to Etienne, all of a sudden he's the number 1 guy there. I think you probably still mix him in a little bit as the number 2 guy. Wide receiver targets, we've mentioned it like 3 times now. He's still available in like 40% of leagues. Wan'Dale Robinson with the Giants. That workload's just going to continue to go up. And then Paris Campbell's an interesting one with the Colts. And Paris Campbell was like a sexy pick 2 years ago. And now they're making a quarterback change with the Colts, which I guess we can kind of tie into this.
Early in your time.
Yeah. So we'll see what that does. But the last 2 games in a row, 18 and 23 PPR points for Paris Campbell, guy you can probably find on your waiver wire. He was targeted a total of 23 times in those 2 games and had a touchdown in each one of them as well. And then, Josh Palmer. We talked about Palmer before. When Keenan Allen's down, Josh Palmer, is a startable flex at least. And now you got Mike Williams out. So this is why we said, I think a few weeks back, like you might just want to stash Josh Palmer because with Williams and Keenan Allen, usually one of them is banged up and not playing. So that's a guy who can provide you some value, especially in deeper leagues.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And one other guy I should mention, I gave this guy out a couple of weeks ago and jumped on it, but he may still be available. And that's Van Jefferson with the Rams. We know that, outside of Cooper Kupp, they've had almost nothing. Really, it's been Kupp and Higbee. Van Jefferson has a good history with Matt Stafford. He is a very legitimate deep threat on this team with Skronik and Allen Robinson struggling the way they are. Van Jefferson's going to get back into that lineup this week, and I wouldn't at all be surprised if he gets a significant number of touches. Now, if you're starting him, You probably won't start him right out the gate, but he certainly is definitely worth a bench spot right now if you have room at the receiver position. And I wouldn't at all be surprised if he plays an impactful role going forward for the Rams for the rest of the season.
All right, so there you go. There's a bunch of waiver wire targets for you. I don't know what the if he's available on your waiver wire, just from a quarterback perspective. Where are you at on Danny Dimes, Huss? He had over 100 yards rushing last game. Like, see a 8 to 12 quarterback rest of the season? Like, do you see that in fantasy, or is it not worth the time right now?
No, listen, I mean, I was high on Danny Dimes at the start of the year.
Yeah, that's true. You were.
And here's the thing. Brian Daboll is, I mean, he is a really, really intelligent coach. And I think he sees, and we've seen so far this year, especially, like, the fact of the matter is they're 6-1 right now, Dusty, and their receiving core has been decimated all season long. And listen, Saquon Barkley's been awesome, but part of the fact that they have so much attention on Barkley has allowed Danny Dimes to get out and run the football consistently. Had a couple big ones last week in the comeback win over the Jags.
He can do it, man. That's so valuable in fantasy. Like,
you know, and I mean, let's face it. I mean, if you're sitting around, like I'm in a league where I have the one quarterback and it's Aaron Rodgers. I mean, I'm looking right now. I was thinking about Trevor Lawrence, but at this point, you know, when you add in the rushing yards, which take Danny Dimes' floor much higher than many other quarterbacks, you're getting Wan'Dale Robinson's now back. You're hopefully going to get Tony back in the next little bit. Listen, he might not be a starter right now, but certainly if you're a one quarterback guy and needed, say you got Mahomes and he's out right now, for a week on the bye week, Danny Dimes absolutely startable right now. And listen, he's outperforming many guys that were penciled in as starters for fantasy teams at the beginning of the season. So I'm high on the Giants, and I'm very high on Danny Dimes, and Brian Daboll's offensive outlook is a big, big part of that.
Yeah, I in that 16-team league I'm in, missed on quarterbacks. I didn't have a bunch of picks early, so I was like, well, I'm just going to throw a bunch of darts here and see what happens. And I drafted Davis Mills. I traded him in that Kelsey deal. I wasn't going to start him ever anyway. Then I drafted Jared Goff, started Goff through the first few weeks, helped me get some wins. I also drafted Daniel Jones in that league. So I've gone to Jones the last couple of weeks, and I think he got me like 25 points this past week. So, yeah, I mean, if you don't have one of those top-end guys, man, Daniel Jones is certainly in the conversation for you, and he'd still be available in some leagues. Not all leagues, but he'd be available in some leagues, so it's certainly an option there for you. All right. Go ahead, Tuss. What were you going to say?
I was just going to say, I mean, and it's the quarterback position is so fickle sometimes. I mean, you could have had Daniel Jones in for 25 last week, or in a win, Lamar Jackson only had 9. RIP to the guy in my league that started Lamar over Joe Burrow. Burrow 39 points, Lamar 9. That's a tough way to lose a game, but
that's
hey, you got to be laughing though if you've got those two guys on your roster. I'll say that.
That's true. That is nice. All right, starts of the week, buddy. Who do you like this week?
All right, well, let's go. I'm going to go through. Here's mine. Starting off at the quarterback position, we're going to go with Kirk Cousins. Primetime Kirk, not good. Noon Kirk, great.
The best.
And the Vikings are coming off the bye week, and they're welcoming in the Arizona Cardinals, who, of course, got a big win last Thursday against the Saints, but are still, I think, a very, very flawed football team. We saw Andy Dalton torch them for 4 touchdowns. He also threw 3 picks. I'm not sure the picks will be there, but I really do think that this Vikings offense, after a nice week of preparation and rest, will be ready to roll. So Kirk Cousins is a nice start this week at quarterback. For running back, I'm going to go with Raheem Mostert. And Mostert's a guy that's probably not available on your waiver wire, but whether it be in your own league or in DFS, great value right now. And I know there's a lot of people that were pretty high on Chase Edmonds, but I think we've seen that Chase Edmonds' ceiling is that of a receiver and a few touches in the ground game. But for the most part, it's Raheem Mostert. And when Mostert is healthy, he can be a horse. Last week against the Steelers, and the Steelers are still pretty good defensively, 16 carries for 79 yards, plus he had 4 catches for 30 and a touchdown. He's the clear number 1 guy. Oh, and they've got the Detroit Lions, who have had a tough time stopping anybody. So love Raheem Mostert this week. My start of the week from a wide receiver position is going to be T. Higgins. And Higgins, shockingly, in that explosion of offense that the Bengals had this week, was actually the 4th targeted receiver on the Bengals, behind Chase, behind Boyd, and behind Hayden Hurst. I think that changes this week on Monday Night Football against the Browns. I'm looking for a big, big game and a big bounce back for T. Higgins on Monday night. And then from the tight end position, Dusty, Pat Freiermuth from the Pittsburgh Steelers. Listen, I've been impressed with Kenny Pickett so far. Had a couple of tough picks. And to be honest, if the Steelers could just have caught one of the 4 interceptions that Tua threw on Sunday night, we're probably talking about a Pittsburgh upset win. It didn't happen, but we're already seeing Kenny Pickett add much more to the air game of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Freiermuth caught 8 of his 9 targets against Miami. I imagine the Philadelphia Eagles are going to put up some points on the Pittsburgh Steelers, so I think they're going to be forced to air it out. And I think that he is a bit of a comfort blanket, if you will, for Kenny Pickett right now. I think Freiermuth continues to see quite a few targets, get some catches, and put up some points for you in your fantasy lineup. So Cousins, Mostert, Higgins, and Freiermuth, my favorite starts on value plays this week in fantasy football.
Yeah, and I'll just quickly hit on the tight end. I'm with you on Freiermuth, actually. That was my guy as well. We talked about him a number of times. I mean, tight end, not a sexy position this year. Freiermuth, there's something there. Like, I think, and there was a play, I guess it was late. You probably saw it as well. It was to Freiermuth. Kenny Pickett, just an absolute dart right behind the defender, like in the only place that ball could go. And Freiermuth had just got tucked in behind. It was a great catch. So Freiermuth would be my start of the week from a value perspective, a tight end as well. At the quarterback position, I was tempted by Tua because he's going up against the Lions. I was almost hedging another Lions getting pumped here. But Tua's had like one great fantasy week so far this season. And it was huge, right? Monster game. Outside of that, he's been very average so far. So I'm going to go with a guy who I think is due for a good game, going up against a team that could certainly allow it. Lamar Jackson started the season 20 points, 42 points, 40 points. He had 100 fantasy points in the first 3 weeks of the season. Since then, he hasn't gone over 17 once, which doesn't make any sense. Tampa appears to be a train wreck. I said I'd stay away from Tampa from a betting perspective. I didn't say anything about fantasy. I think Lamar Jackson is due for a pretty big game. So it doesn't sound, it's Lamar. Of course you're going to start him. But I also think he's due. I mean, I was listening to a podcast yesterday. They were talking about starting some other guys ahead of Lamar Jackson. I'm like, man, you can't, because Lamar could put up 40 on your bench and you'll never be able to live with yourself. So I think Lamar's due for a big one. So I'm going to get on Lamar Jackson this week. I do not believe anything Aaron Rodgers says anymore, especially what could be really good for us right now is a game against the Bills, because I'm assuming them to be down for the majority of this game. So I'm going to throw Aaron Jones in there as a start of the week at the running back position. You saw what he did this last week, 9 catches. That's before Lazard essentially went down, and he's questionable for this week. There's literally, it could be a position here where they're down by 25. The Bills are sitting back in a little bit of prevent anyway because they know they've won the game. The only guy Aaron Rodgers likes to throw the ball to is Aaron Jones anyway. Aaron Jones could have 15 freaking catches this week. So Aaron Jones is going to be my start of the week at the running back position. Haas, just quickly on Rodgers. Like Rodgers saying, maybe this is what we need right now, a game against Buffalo. I'm like, dude, have you not been watching your team? The last thing you need right now is a game against the Bills.
Well, I mean, look, they had the Giants, then they had the Jets, and then they had the Commanders, and they went 0 for 3. So maybe he's just playing the opposites right now, fading themselves. I don't expect much from Green Bay. Interesting that they are so banged up at the receiver position. We've seen the resurgence of Sammy Watkins, who's popped back in probably for 2 weeks before he gets hurt again.
Yeah, he'll be hurt again for sure.
52% of snaps last week. First time Aaron Rodgers has been a double-digit underdog in over a decade. This is going to be, listen, I think it's going from bad to worse right now. And I'm surrounded by a lot of Viking fans here in Winnipeg. And I mean, they were on the bye last week watching the shit-eating grins on some of the guys in purple, watching the Packers lose to the Commanders. No, That's what these rivalries are all about.
And my start of the week at wide receiver is a guy who's had a bunch of really good fantasy games, but hasn't had that holy smokes, look at this guy game just yet. And I know you've talked about him, I think, on the Fantasy Football Extravaganza, maybe just on regular Lock Shop episodes. So you'll probably like this pick, but I'm going to go with Chris Olave this week as my start of the week at the wide receiver position. His last 5 weeks in which he played, he missed a game in there, 11 points. That was week 2. 23 points, which was no touchdowns. He put up 23 points and no touchdowns. Yeah. 13 targets, 9 catches, 147 yards. The week after that, had a touchdown for 16 PPR points. The week after that, touchdown, 15.4 PPR points. This past week, he only had 7 catches, but they went for 106 yards. He was targeted 14 times. If he gets targeted 12, 13, 14 times again, he's probably going to catch 8 or 9 of those balls. So I like Olave this week. I think that's a game in which the Saints might be trailing against the Raiders, and more reason to get the balls into the hands of Chris Olave, who looks like the real deal, buddy. So I contemplated DJ Moore finally having a game for the Panthers, but I simply couldn't do it. Trade deadline looming. I thought maybe they give him a little bit of a bump here, possibly wheel and deal him, but I'll stick with Olave.
I think I dropped DJ Moore in one of my leagues a couple of weeks ago, and that was a guy I picked high.
Understandable at that point, but yeah.
Done, at that point. And hey, let me just throw in another receiver, my guy, Scary Terry McLaurin. Heineke is back. McLaurin is back. Got into the end zone last week. I think he will continue to have more prominence and a bigger role in that Commanders offense. Left hand up for the Commanders. You seen that video?
No, I haven't seen that video. Which one's that?
Everyone right now, go onto Twitter, just put in left hand up Commanders and thank me later. It's a hot jingle right now.
Really?
I love these fan videos.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'll check that. I see it. I'm not going to listen to it right now, but I see it there. I was just going to say on Terry McLaurin because, if you listen to my radio show, I've had a man crush on Terry McLaurin for 5 years.
Yes.
And you know what? Just looking at his production so far, 13.8 week 1, 12.2, 16.2. Like, that's not bad. That was a 100-yard game. 3.5, not a good look. 12.6, 8.2. And then last week, 18.3. So he is coming off his best fantasy game of the season. So fingers crossed.
Yeah, because Wentz is out.
Yeah. Wentz was bad news for Scary Terry. So now he's got Heineke riding in there again, so hopefully that works out. All right, that's going to do it for the Lock Shop's Fantasy Football Extravaganza. We got more episodes of the Lock Shop, obviously, coming your way the rest of the week. Tomorrow, I don't know, has to even dive into these CFL games? We don't know what the roster, that's a tough week. Are there golf picks we could do? Could we get to some golf picks tomorrow?
Yeah, well, we can definitely do some NHL picks.
We can definitely do puck picks. I know that for sure, yeah. Get some World Series stuff too, maybe.
Well, World Series and maybe even a little hoops, maybe a hoops prop or two.
Ooh.
Now that the association is on.
Yeah.
One thing
handicap
I know,
in the hard court. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. The final week of the CFL is going to be a bit of a gong show.
Tough.
So,
yeah.
I wouldn't recommend anyone wagering right now on the Canadian Football League week 21 or whatever.
We might fire out some Twitter picks on Friday morning or something because it's a triple header Saturday and then Lions and Bombers on Friday. So we'll have a better read once we see these depth charts. Once we see the depth charts, we can give you some picks on the CFL, but tomorrow might be a little early. And then we have Thursday Night Football, obviously best bets, props, and parlays all coming your way as we work our way through another week here on the Lock Shop. Huss, enjoy the rest of your day, buddy.
Right back at you, dude.